Welcome, everybody, to a brand new episode of the RubberGum Anime Podcast, where I am the gum and my friend August here is the rubber. And today we are going to be talking about the long anticipated arrival of the discussion of one of the biggest movies of the year and one of the most culturally significant anime things to happen in recent memory. We're going to be talking about Demon Slayer, Infinity Train, Kimetsu no Yaiba. We're going to be talking about the film August and I
Yeah,
watched. And we're also going to be detailing some of our thoughts about Demon Slayer as a whole.
yeah.
So,
I was
whoa.
reminded of the real quick. I was reminded of the Twitter meme where it's like Sideshow Bob and Sideshow Mel, where Sideshow Bob is like, do you like Kimetsu? Do you like Demon Slayer? And Sideshow Mel is like, why, yes, I like Kimetsu no Yaiba.
Fucking that was a big My Hero Academia meme
Yeah,
too.
that was
Uh,
exactly the one.
uh, uh, God, that show has a bunch of fucking movies. Probably never going to cover that.
Nope.
that's just
I
that's
I
too great a task,
I
frankly.
and I don't give enough of a shit.
You know what? Fair enough. And we're going to start off this week with our usual opening segment, talking about anything Japanese that we may have been consuming as of recently, anime or otherwise. But first, before we launch directly into that, if you pay attention to the Jams and Tea podcast or just us in general, you may be aware of this, but there's no better place to promote it than here. Is that August recently made a video about Jetman Sentai series. If you haven't seen it yet, we're going to link it in the description below, but it is a terrific
Absolutely.
video. And you should watch it. I enjoyed it, and I
Yeah.
don't know a goddamn thing about Sentai.
Yeah. So there's there's your kind of inspiration to go do so. It's a 30 some minute video. It's a lot of in-depth character and story analysis.
It's
I
good
think it
shit.
yeah, I think it brings something to the table that has a little more of a filmmaking slant than Sentai critique usually does. So that's kind of my other sell.
Your view is very holistic, which I think is a lot more interesting than, say, like a lot of people tend to critique things in sort of this avenue of like anime and sentai and all that kind of stuff. They sort of approach it with the knowledge of the niche and sort of apply the criticisms there, which is sort of like, it's an effective way to critique, but it's not always like you and I think, definitely approach
Yeah.
everything from that kind of perspective. So it's a little bit more valuable from an outsider view, too, I think.
Yeah, that's I'd say where it's most valuable to the person who's a little more on the outside of the subculture, maybe
Yeah.
even getting in.
So, have you been watching anything? I was going to say this week,
Uh,
as if this is a weekly podcast and not whenever the fuck we can actually
Whenever the
manage
fuck
to
we
do
have
this.
time, yeah. I've been watching two major things in the kind of time in between these two podcasts. I got through, and I mentioned this before, but I mentioned starting this show, but to emphasize my progress, I got to the end of season 3 of Attack on Titan, which
Ah,
I think it is. I got to kind of the shoe drop moment, so to speak, which is definitely where the show takes a very sharp left turn and also suddenly becomes miles more interesting, I think. So
so the talks I heard of season 3 are actually worth something then.
they're actually worth a little because although unfortunately it only happens at like the third to last episode of the season. So
Hey, it still sounds like it's pretty worth it.
it's if you don't know what the twist is and you haven't had it spoiled for you, I think it is worth it in the long run. And
I see a video on the horizon sometime in the future coming out of this somehow.
perhaps, yeah. Uh, the other major thing, uh, continuing on my kind of Sentai watch through, and maybe something that'll become a video to if someday in the future. I've been watching Kyoryu Sentai Zyu Ranger, which is the show that Mighty Morphin Power Rangers was adapted from, the 16th Sentai season, Jetman being the 15th. So I felt this was a very natural progression. I'm about halfway through, I'd say, and wow, this is awful. This show is terrible.
Oh no, that's such a sharp decline from Jetman, from at least from what I know about.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, I think Jetman's amazing. I think that's a fantastic show, and this is just a complete left turn from that. There's it takes on much more of a kid friendly tone, which, I mean, it's a kid show, sure, fine, but it does that at the sacrifice of like all of the character development. Like, not one of these people has a personality, save for Barai, who is the best. Barai and Witch Bandora, the main villain, are the best two characters in the show, and they're entertaining as hell. The Dragon Ranger arc is amazing, but the rest of it is just it's kind of unwatchable at times, quite honestly. But if episode 17 through 22, that 6 episode stretch is amazing, and then the rest is not good.
Well, I'm glad our viewers have you to be able to point that out, because I would hate to have to burn through 17 episodes just to fucking. I didn't actually know that it was like this is all like of at peace with like a whole thing that's like that's the 15th and this is the 16th or whatever. Like, I didn't know that it was all related that way.
It's like a loose continuity in that there are like team ups between the past teams, and it all takes place in the same universe, but at the same time, you're never really getting any, like, a previous team isn't just going to show up out of the blue and whip out their powers and mechas to help the new team. That's usually relegated for the crossover movies.
Oh, well, that's nifty.
Although there is one season that takes place outside of the main continuity, and that's the 41st show, Q Ranger, which I know that.
How recent was that? 41st?
That was 4 years ago.
Oh, wow.
So they're on 45. And I've seen about 3, so.
Well, I mean, in your defense, I can't imagine as worthwhile as some Sentai must be, a la Jetman. I can't imagine that having to wade through all of that would be something that would yield incredible results.
No, I mean, most of these shows are undoubtedly mediocre or bad.
Did you ever see the Power Rangers movie, the American one from like a couple of years ago, where some fucking actress was Rita Repulsa, I think.
Oh yeah,
Bryan Cranston.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, what was that like as a Sentai fan?
That was it was a very American take on it. is perhaps the kindest thing I can say about it. I honestly kind of prefer the 97 Power Rangers movie, which is campy and bad, but it's really fun.
I know like a little bit about that. We need to do some like Power Rangers related thing, because I think of all people, Morgan actually has watched a lot of Power Rangers.
Okay.
So that would be an interesting cross section, because I don't know goddamn anything about them.
I might see if there's like an interesting Sentai show that would be worth watching through. Although they are like 50 episodes long and repetitive, so it would be an effort.
Well, we can find something in the future. The only thing about Power Rangers that I remember in any detail was a Power Rangers Dino Thunder game for the GameCube. And I
Oh
just
yeah.
remember playing that for about like 5 hours at my friend's house and being really pissed off that I couldn't play as the T-Rex. I was just like, I want to play as give me the fucking T-Rex. And they just never did. So
What
naturally, fuck you, Power Rangers Dino Thunder for the GameCube.
what a bunch of hacks,
I
really.
mean, like, what is this? Some kind of the Suicide Squad? I'm gonna shoot myself on camera.
Oh no.
Oh God! Speaking of shooting myself, the only thing that I've watched Japanese recently is I've been making my way this year through the filmography of one Mister Sion Sono. If you
Okay.
don't know who Sion Sono is, you probably know him through one of two ways. One being the trailer for his new movie Prisoners of the Ghostland was most recently released, and that movie stars Nicolas Cage in it.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
eager to see that, even though I haven't heard amazing things about it. But he also made a movie called Love Exposure, which is a 5 hour long, absolutely batshit insane movie that I mean I there is simply no way to convey what Love Exposure is about, b what it's like to watch it. I can only advocate that just go watch it. I know it's 5 hours long, but I watched that and that was the best movie I think I watched last year. It was I bought it on Blu-ray. It was an absolutely joyous experience, and I was like, I need to make my way through this dude's filmography because he's got a great technical eye for stuff. He's got movies that are an absolute blast, like Why Don't We Play in Hell, which is basically like, hey, do you like it's like a Japanese like Tarantino kind of movie. It's like Kill Bill if it was also like a mafia movie, but it's also like about filmmaking, and it's just one in giant action scene, and it's great. I also saw Anti Porno, which is like a weird persona mixed with like it's like Bergman-y, but it's also like super Japanese, and it's like really cool, and like it's like Sion Sono's Mulholland Drive. But recently I watched his film Suicide Club, which is one of his first movies, if not his first movie. And while it is my least favorite of his movies that I have seen thus far, it is a great movie nonetheless. It is basically his take on J horror, um, which is a genre that I surprisingly don't get along with very well. Like I've seen a lot of J horror, a lot of the staples in the genre, and I tend to really prefer the really moody, really atmospheric Kiyoshi Kurosawa's Pulse kind of stuff. I don't really like Ring or The Grudge or
Yeah.
Ju-on. Just I've never gotten the appeal of those movies, frankly. They all seem so thin to me. So I was a little wary with Suicide Club, but it's like it's very much like Pulse, but if Sion Sono made it, which is to say, it's fucking insane. It's basically like watching a malevolent, suicidal spirit pass through different parts of Japan and wreak absolute havoc over it. And it's like both weirdly funny and also just insanely fucking morbid, like stomach churningly at points. And it makes a really interesting like combination of tones, and I really enjoyed it. It's definitely on like the lower end. It's a little bit like maybe it's a 10 or so minutes too long, but there's so much happening in it, and it's so rooted in a post 1980s Japan where, you know, they had that spree of strange crime and that kind of economic boom that sort of led to a rise in suicide rates. And it's a movie that's very much about that. And it's fascinating. I'm not even sure, like, trying to predict where anyone will land on any Sion Sono thing is basically impossible. I don't know how to recommend his movies or like where to start, but it's definitely worthwhile if it sounds interesting. If I had to pick a movie of his for people to go watch to get into him, it would probably be Why Don't You Play in Hell, just because it's so much fun. But dude is whack. Good for him.
I have only seen one Sion Sono film myself. That's his movie Tag, which I didn't really care for.
Yeah, that seems to be the movie that is the least regarded amongst my mutuals.
Yeah, it there was a lot interesting happening, but I just never felt really compelled by any of it. Is kind of how I'd put it.
That sounds like I mean, the dude is so off the wall that it's just kind of by like, he's definitely not going to have a career full of absolute hitters just because that's not the type of filmmaker he is. He's such a fucking weirdo, and that's why I like him. So that makes sense. But yeah, I guess that's all I've got.
Yeah.
So
oh boy,
let's move into the episode proper.
Yeah.
Demon Slayer. You may have heard of it. I mean, and that's not even me being like facetious. Demon Slayer is insanely popular. I believe in 2020, for the first time in years, Demon Slayer actually dethroned One Piece as the best-selling manga in Shonen Jump. Which is notable for a couple of reasons, gaining traction for a couple of years, and because the manga ended last year. So, it's not going to be fighting for that top spot with One Piece or even My Hero Academia anymore. But this is a manga series that has sort of taken off. I think that the 2010s in terms of shonen manga have been scrambling to find its next, big thing. Because, you had the end of Naruto, you had the end of Bleach, and One Piece is, of course, still trailing along because Oda is as Oda does. And,
yeah. And I mean, we're also seeing like fairly recently the end of JoJo Part 8 on top of this, just to really emphasize this. There's this real air of ending to shonen right now, and I think this is even further exemplified by Oda putting a roundabout date on the end of One Piece. So
yeah, we are within a couple of years, realistically, because he says it's coming a little bit sooner than I think it probably is actually going to come. But there's definitely like a sea change happening right now in the world of shonen. And we're sort of seeing the old guard disappear and be replaced with what's new. My Hero Academia, as I mentioned previously, is very much that, but that is also coming to an end or has ended. But it's been insanely popular, as is its show equivalent. But Demon Slayer has also been one of those things to sort of come up and really, I'd say it's mostly analogous to that of something like Bleach. Frankly, it's got a very similar premise and appeal to it, in my opinion. And to the shock of many, when it came to the adaptation, the inevitable, obvious adaptation that Demon Slayer was inevitably going to get, it came down to Studio Ufotable, which I don't think anybody saw coming, because this is such a strange choice for them.
It seems like a Mappa or a Bones show.
Mm-hmm.
Like
very much so.
That it like Ufotable is like the prestige studio. So seeing them pick up your shonen manga is really unprecedented in a sense.
I think that it's like, not to speculate on things that I don't know about or anything, but just knowing how much money Ufotable puts into their productions and how focused they are, I would guess that at least some of that decision was probably monetarily based, just because, like they've done like the most stuff they've done in the 2010s is Fate. They've done Fate Zero, they did Unlimited Blade Works, they did the Heaven's Field trilogy. And, for as successful as those properties are, Fate is not as big as something like Demon Slayer. Fate is not as big as something like One Piece. So inevitably they were going to have to tie themselves to something else. So naturally it got the attention of many people because, Ufotable, high quality animation. And then the show rolled around, and the show, as expected, became insanely popular because, we kind of live in an age where we don't really have to worry about anime studios butchering adaptations anymore. Like, there are definitely arguments to be made. Like, I know there's a lot of differences between things like, what's the fucking Viking anime? Help me
Vinland
out.
Saga.
Vinland Saga. There's definitely like a lot of arguments to be made, I think, about like the subtleties in adaptation. But in terms of like straight like point A, point B adaptations of like just trying to get an accurate depiction of the source material, it's not as dire or rare as it was in the 2000s, because I mean, it was kind of shooting fish in a barrel. Sometimes you get a direct adaptation that was completely honest, and sometimes you get something that was nothing like the original product at all. And now we have something that can basically effortlessly translate the appeal of the source material into a show, and as such, Demon Slayer has been insanely successful. And for the first time on this podcast, we get to live up to our name here, because August and I actually have slightly differing takes about Demon Slayer, the show as a whole. We've mentioned in the past that we tend to differ, at least in anime. A lot of our tastes overlap. Where we differ slightly is the sort of the more run-of-the-mill shonen adaptation stuff, which I'm definitely a bit more fond of, even if I'm way more like skeptical than 90% of anime fans, but I'm a little bit kinder to the genre as a whole. So, we have differing opinions on this thing that very much exemplifies the genre of shonen. So what exactly is it that makes Demon Slayer Demon Slayer? And I'd say that, like, if you're aware of what shonen genre is, which is, basically the hero's journey of anime and manga, it's like, I guess it's sort of the whole like Naruto thing, where it's like you have the special main character who's in some kind of unfortunate circumstance, who finds himself thrust into this world where he needs to become exceptional and grow stronger so that he can explore the world and explore his purpose, or fulfill a quest of some kind, some sort of Campbellian thing. And Demon Slayer is about Tanjiro, the main character, who, this is hardly a spoiler, it's basically baked into the plot synopsis of everything. His family gets fucking murdered, like all of them basically, by a demon, and demons are monsters. And the only survivor is his little sister,
Nezuko,
who is bitten by the demon, survives, but is in the process of becoming a demon. And essentially, he has to carry her with him on his journey, keep her safe. There's like a ton of rules about demons. They can't be like exposed to sunlight in this universe, I don't think.
And it is worth mentioning, the demon she has been bitten by is none other than the head honcho of all demons ever, Muzan Kibutsushi, I believe his name is.
A man who looks alarmingly like Michael Jackson in one of his music videos.
That's
interesting character design there.
That's about the first thing that I think jumps out to anyone about him, which is
And so from then on, we have sort of the premise, the different thing about Demon Slayer is that Tanjiro as a character is he's trying to protect his sister, he's trying to, be the Demon Slayer boy, but it's also about how Tanjiro has he's a very soft boy. He's got a limitless amount of empathy, and he shows his nemesis, the demons, he shows them an alarming amount of empathy when he dispatches them. So there's a sort of quirk baked into his character, and he joins the Demon Slayers, he trains, and he goes and basically shonen anime hijinks ensue. And I think to lend some credit to August's opinion, even though I don't share it, is that like for as good as the show is, in my opinion, for as high quality as the animation is, and the directing, and just generally everything about it being very tightly made, if you're not a fan of shonen anime, there's simply no reason to watch this. It epitomizes the genre in all of the good ways, in some of the bad ways. There's nothing about it that really separates it other than its remarkable efficiency at being what you want it to be.
I would say, yeah, meat and potatoes is a good phrase for it. And sure, meat and potatoes, not bad. It's just if you're looking for something more, look elsewhere, because Demon Slayer is not going to be your cup of tea necessarily. That's not to say you won't enjoy elements of it, because I think the show certainly has some good, even exceptional aspects to it that set itself enough apart from other shonen series. And I would say that about epitomizes how I personally feel. I think it's enough of a show that I was able to sit through the whole thing. I was never like majorly put off, except by a couple moments. I thought that, at least in terms of the television show, I thought its ending on a training arc was a particularly weak decision. But all that being said, I still thought it was a serviceable enough show in its 24, 26 episode run.
Somewhere around that range.
Yeah. How was Demon Slayer for you, though?
Demon Slayer for me was it was just so popular that I just kind of had to, like, even though I haven't been keeping up with a whole lot of anime that don't like jump out at me, that I don't like know anything about, I was just sort of like, I gotta check this out and see what the hype is all about. And it's definitely meat and potatoes. It definitely like enraptured me from a technical perspective. It also has soundtrack by Ufotable main staple Yuki Kajira. And I love the aesthetics. The interesting thing about it too is that the animation and art style in and of itself is actually quite different from the Ufotable mainstays. You might expect something that looks like Garden of Sinners. You might expect something that looks like Fate. And in parts, definitely, there's a lot of the whole, like the digital lighting effects that they use are very similar, kind of creates a similar vibe. But there's a more like the less urban setting of this allows it to feel a little bit more like classic, I guess. And the interesting thing about the animation is the way that the powers and abilities are illustrated in it. There's like this really interesting, almost like watercolor vibe that a lot of the attacks have and are visualized with, like the like the water or fire that is like that these characters draw from or use in their powers is visualized in a super cool way. And that it also gets a lot of mileage out of. A lot of the battles and fights are very tactical and interesting. And it does hold my interest very well. I think that is on a moment-to-moment basis, it's very entertaining. It's a very fun show. The only gripes I have with it are really with, I think, some of the side characters, particularly Zenitsu. Just sometimes these shows, no matter how much I like them or how much they endear themselves to me, there are always characters who belong to certain archetypes or who are, a certain anime trope that just rubs me the wrong way. And my God, Zenitsu is just like the epitome of this, when it's just like, oh God, we're in the year 2021 and we're still doing the anime perv trope where he's got like the savant thing about him that lets him like fight and hold his own sometimes, but he like cries and whines all the time, and he's also relentlessly horny, and I'm just like, I don't find anything about you interesting.
I had very similar problems with that character. I did find a lot of my personal issues with the show stemmed outside of structurally, which I mentioned earlier,
Mhm.
stemmed a little from its universe. I thought the conceit that Muzan being the only demon who can reproduce and create other demons was a little unsatisfying, quite honestly, because it makes Tanjiro's journey go from uh, just like this simple avenge my family quest to like this world-ending, most significant thing ever quest, which is a trope I'm not terribly fond of,
Mm.
which I think is definitely epitomized in that my favorite shonen is Hunter x Hunter. But that aside, yeah.
No, I completely agree with that. I also like when it stacks up to the other shonen that are a little bit more run of the mill that I really like. It's very focused, but that doesn't mean like focus doesn't always translate to intrigue. Like the thing that I said that it sort of embodies the appeal of is Bleach, which goddamn is a show I could talk about on my own for hours. And has like 90,000 more problems than Demon Slayer does if you account for the entirety of the series. But the part of it that I like, something like the Soul Society arc, which is very similar to Hunter x Hunter in a lot of ways, where it has this really broad, really interesting world that sort of has all these different factions and facets and these cool things that are going on in it, is that you're constantly kind of thrown for a loop in that you don't really know what to expect. Like you might be in a story that's surrounded by a lot of different tropes and a lot of different, things coming at you, but the overall trajectory or world is something that you don't know all about, and you're constantly like, I want to know more. Tell me more about this. And Demon Slayer doesn't really have that in terms of its world. I'd say that like it's a very immediately satisfying thing, but a year later after I watched the show initially, it's not something that I remember a terrific of like amount of. I remember some of the fights and battles are well constructed, they're tactical, but a lot of the things that Demon Slayer does well or even very well are just things that other shows like it does exceptionally or masterfully. And that, it's not Demon Slayer's fault, but it's a very jack of all trades show. And in such, it will do a whole lot of things and it will do them all well, but it won't do any one thing amazingly. On the technical level, sure, because Ufotable's making it, but on the core level, it's not different, but you can still get something out of it. And naturally, just because of where Demon Slayer the show has left off, there was a whole to do about what was going to come next. Because it was made apparent pretty soon after that it was going to be continued with a movie, which is interesting because not a lot of anime, like we talked about the sort of phenomenon of anime movies and how they're like spin-offs or alternate paths or timelines or like whatever in their relation. They're very, very rarely an actual canon
Yeah,
continuation of a story.
it feels like a
So,
very 90s thing to do,
oh
which
yeah.
I think is really I think that's a really interesting move to make with the film,
Mhm.
like taking a film adaptation and making this not just a continuation but an integral part to the story. I think is, if nothing else, a bold move.
Mhm.
uh, and obviously a move that ended up paying off quite significantly because
Mhm.
uh, for those who don't know, this is uh, Demon Slayer Infinity Train is the highest grossing Japanese film of all time.
Beating
It,
out Spirited Away, I believe, who previously
yeah,
held that title.
and not even just, yeah. I said Japanese film, excluding animated, because it has been just that successful and profitable, making $500 million at the box office. This
Even though it
this
was
was
delayed by the pandemic and like the pandemic is still happening. So this is nothing less than a full blown phenomenon.
Yeah. I heard people talking about it at my high school to give perspective for how saturated it was during its theatrical run, which is something I had never heard talked about before. I had never expected someone who wasn't deep into the subculture to talk about the Demon Slayer movie. Like, for perspective, it blew my mind when someone else knew what Evangelion was when I was a freshman, and now and as a senior, hearing people just talk about, oh yeah, the Demon Slayer movie is it just the hold up. It was that's kind of my perspective on just how big of a phenomenon this truly was.
Oh yeah, it's definitely something that's big. It's one of the most like in terms of things that have made waves in anime as of late, that's been like the event of the year so far. Like I remember I saw posters for that in like the Cinemark that I went to back when, movie theaters were open. And yeah, I was excited for it just because it's like, okay, we've got Ufotable is still making it, and they made the show look amazing. They're gonna make the movie look amazing. Generally speaking, we watch the Heaven's Feel movies, which are sort of from this era. It's like, you can expect something of a similar level of quality. And, there's a lot of hype that this arc, the Infinity Train arc, had, which I haven't read the manga, but I just heard a lot of people talking about how cool they found it. And I was like, okay, sick. And ever since then, I've just been kind of like waiting for this to leak online or for me to be able to see it.
I
And
mean, see it legally in theaters, yeah.
yes, and support your local movie theater. Yeah, legally. And so, once we finally acquired the film, we were like, okay, we need to get up, we need to watch this, we need to, evaluate it. We both seen Demon Slayer, obviously, and we're both, generally speaking, we are positive on it, so let's go for this. And one night we just put it on. My girlfriend, who has never seen Demon Slayer, she was having not a great day, and so I was just like, hey, just get on here and we'll fucking goof off with this movie, it'll be fun. And
well, before we get into this, let me emphasize something. If you like this film, that is wonderful. We do not intend what we say next to be contrarians, to shit on someone's parade. We say this out of a genuine place of passion. We say this as people who are fans of anime, people who like the medium. We are fans of film, music. Yeah. That's the best primer I can get to you.
So with August's primer there, you can tell that we've perhaps buried the lead a little bit in this, which the reception to this movie is, by any stretch of the imagination, is as successful as it is monetarily, critically speaking. And, we've covered a lot of things on this show thus far, even though we haven't had that many episodes. And God bless, we've covered some real fucking clunkers. We've covered stuff like Future Diary, the Hunter x Hunter movies, and, the whole spectrum, really. And while I definitely can't say that the Demon Slayer movie is the worst thing we've covered on the show, I can certainly say that it was the most annoying. Well, I couldn't say I hate it as much as I hate something like the Hunter x Hunter movies or even Ava 3, which really are things that I hate, not even just because of the inherent negative qualities that we spoke to, but because they tarnish something that I do otherwise love. And while I am a fan of Demon Slayer, I definitely don't love it as much as I love something like Ava, or as much as I love something like Hunter x Hunter. So naturally, there's just kind of a ceiling for this kind of thing. That said, this is one of the most woefully surreal experiences I think I've ever had with something, because I watched it, and when we were just in a constant state of evolving disbelief that this was what the Demon Slayer movie was.
That's really the best way to put it. I remember the three of us sat there just not really even angry, but baffled, just because this has had very positive reception, and it was like this is it. This is what has been put in front of us.
And, maybe chalk it up to, I had said at the very beginning of this episode that we tend to evaluate things from a little bit more of a holistic perspective. You and I definitely have a baseline that we have for most things we engage with in media. We don't really tailor our expectations too much when it comes to different things. And I feel like some people just kind of engage in anime in a different way they do with most things. And I get that. But even then, the disparity that it just doesn't account for is mind blowing. I said that I thought lately, my girlfriend, I was just like, yo, Demon Slayer is a really good like gateway anime. So naturally, I think the movie, while she may not know what was going on, it was just like, yeah, this will be something that can, you can at least turn your brain off and watch the fights being cool. And to evaluate it from a little bit less of a plot character specific perspective, I think we should sort of garnish this with the technicals, which are the nicest thing I could say about the movie. And yet it is also the most damning in that this is easily by a country mile the least impressive thing I've seen from Ufotable thus far.
It, I will give them this. It still has a lot of the talent being put into it. The animators here are still leagues above what you would expect from just a normal TV studio. And that's really the key word I want to highlight here, is that this doesn't feel like a theatrical film. It feels more like just a television show from how it looks, how the animation plays out, how the cuts lead into one another.
Which is weird because the director is the director of the show, which I don't know how these things translate or don't translate, but frankly, there does feel like a marked difference between these things. Yeah, it's been a while since I've seen Demon Slayer, but on a moment-to-moment basis, the show is edited more tightly than this is. It's obviously the episodic format has a tighter structure to it, but like that's what I think partially has to do with the film's absolutely god-awful pacing, is that when you're not anchored to that 24-minute episode arc thing, and you have a little bit more of a free-form narrative going on here, and you're adapting an entire arc, which is something I was trepidatious of, because it's like, yeah, no matter how much time you're given, adapting an entire arc in one movie sounds to me like you might be biting off more than you can chew, and you might truncate all of it. And fucking weirdly enough, the movie doesn't have enough plot to sustain its runtime, and it stretches itself so fucking thin.
So much to the point where there are two main villains, which that was the most damning thing about the whole thing for me. That why did the film, because so we have the lower one guy who's our main villain. I think I don't know what his number is. It doesn't
lower. I think he actually might be lower one.
Yeah.
Fucking lower one of the 12 Kizuki, which are like the 12 main bad dudes in the Demon Slayer universe.
Anyway, point being, somehow this character does not manage to sustain the interest of the film throughout its entire runtime.
Yeah.
Because I'd say he's killed a good 20 minutes before the film ends, only to introduce another villain who is watching from the sidelines the whole time.
Oh God, I have thoughts about that part, but like,
that will be a little later. So
the technicals of the animation itself are like mostly fine, but like, again, we just watched the Heaven's Feel trilogy, which we were absolutely resplendent when it came to our praise regarding it, because it's some of the best animation I've ever seen. And I feel like that that maybe somebody knows something that we don't hear, and this didn't get as much money for whatever reason, even though this is obviously the thing that's going to be way more successful. But there's just a distinct lack of like even the basic like color design of the show feels a bit muted here. Maybe it's because of the locations themselves being very limited, but like
being on, yeah, which
especially that last 30 minutes or so that you mentioned where that new villain shows up and it's just like
a
a brown
forest,
place.
yeah, a brown forest with
It there's nothing about it that really like you can acknowledge me like I mean this is competent, sure, but like where's the flair, the
where
verve? Like
there,
even in the ending
yeah,
arc of the show, when they're fighting like the spider family and shit, there's so much like shot composition and directing that's like really stand out that I still remember in my head that
the
this
Spider
movie
Family
doesn't have.
arc also did this really great thing where it was mostly like set in this very dark location,
Yeah.
which made the characters look really gritty, and it also made the powers look superhuman because they were like spotlight colored.
Mm-hmm.
And here everything just feels like a varying shade of orange or brownish.
Very muted singular colors that are just not interesting to showcase these powers in.
Yeah.
So on like a technical raw level, it's fine.
It's
Which
fine.
is like, and August and we have enjoyed plenty of things and we've watched plenty of anime where technicals are simply not as imperative as the raw story being told. It's the package that it's wrapped in, frankly. And while it can enhance things, it's not imperative. So the fact that this doesn't like live up to snuff of the ufotable pedigree, it's disappointing, sure, but it's not so much so that I think it takes away from anything because the technicals in the story of something like this, something so meat and potatoes, it's really not something where the story being told and the technicals interfere or coalesce all that often anyway. So they kind of take place on separate planes in my critical mindset. So that being said, the story at hand is it's so weird that this follows something like that Spider Family arc. And like again, I don't know how good of an adaptation this is because I haven't read the manga. But if it's as quality of an adaptation, I there's a lot of shonen villains run the risk of being one-dimensional and flat and kind of boring and bad. Fucking
like I definitely can see what you're getting at. It's like the obvious cliche to run into is world domination or just wanting to kill someone, and they don't have a personality or goal beyond that. A and that's a trap this movie runs headfirst into.
There are two ways you obfuscate this. Way number one, you take the Araki approach and you make your one-dimensional villain as entertaining as humanly possible. You make him a Dio Brando, where his very presence and dialogue and power set are just so charismatic and appealing that you don't really care that he doesn't like this. His single-minded goal feels of at peace with the way he expresses himself. Or even somebody like Yoshikage Kira, whose real interest comes from the fact that his single-minded one-dimensionality clashes so much with the world that he finds himself in that it creates an interesting commentary that's it's saying something about the kind of urban setting that they live within, and it can work.
Yeah. It can work very easily, and those characters, while I don't think anyone could ever say they enjoy them as personalities necessarily, you can enjoy them immensely, just as you say, presences, something to direct your anger at, to lose, and something to give your heroes to fight.
Yeah, someone you want to root for the downfall of. You're just like, oh, this guy's a fucking bastard. I want you to kill him. Like, you don't have to make a complex villain. And, appreciate when you do make a complex villain. There's nobody in the business better at that than Yoshihiro Togashi, who all of his villains can barely even be called villains. They are just characters who happen to clash, and that's fine. And then there are, like, say, again, to go back to Bleach, there are villains like Aizen, who gets mileage out of the first part of the story he's in, and then for the rest of the entire show, he's fucking boring. And lo and behold, we find ourselves at the Demon Slayer movie, where the first villain is I'm comically gay villain who's doing a bad thing standing atop this train like I'm that one dude from fucking Bakano, I guess.
Yeah, I don't. This guy, the most interesting. So his plan is also the worst plan I've ever heard. He wants to put the demon slayers to sleep, so he can eat the people on the train, so he can then kill the demon slayers in the dream. And it's like, just cut out the middleman here, right? And he does this all while thinking his best course of action here is to send in two weak guys to get killed so he can disguise his presence and then literally turn into the train.
Yeah, he just becomes the train. Like, he fuses with it. And I think the like the movie basically, like, if you're just like, oh well, if you've seen the movie and you're just like, oh well, August, that's not it at all. See, the reason he's doing this is just like, okay, I'm gonna stop you right there. The problem with this first part of the movie here is that it spins its wheels so much and keeps trying to justify what's happening, even though no character is really doing anything. Like, I bring up this usage a lot, and I hate to invoke it just because I don't like it when other people do. But, like, there's a thing that I experience when I read lots of bad fan fiction where the author seems to try to anticipate people finding flaws with their story, so they overwrite everything to justify each and every tiny little aspect of the universe. And as soon as they get on that fucking train and find out there are demons there, that's all the movie does. Is just like, oh, these people are asleep, but we can't wake them up. But we have to be in the dream. We have to wake up, and it's mind numbing. It's absolutely, like, it feels like I'm being, like, put to sleep. Ironically, but there's these fucking kids that are sort of doing this thing's bidding, which do, in the movie's defense, create the single funniest moment in the entire film.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
There's like this, I don't really know what the deal is, if like the kids are demons or if they've been like taken over or whatever, but there's this part where like Tanjiro like comes up to one of them and like they're being manipulated somehow, and he's just like, I don't care that you have tuberculosis, get up.
Get up, bitch.
The exact fucking line he says. And to circle back here of just like, this part of the plot's very stagnant. One of the real reasons why I think this movie sucks is that the characterization's non-existent here.
So I think we should start with, we'll go through the main cast first.
Yeah, good idea.
And then talk about Flame Hashira and the two villains, because they're the worst characters ever, and we'll get to them in a minute. So Tanjiro, I want to say he's the best part of the film, if only by virtue of doing something.
He's the character with the most agency, and he does not act out of character from the way he's characterized before. I would have appreciated a little bit on the movie's behalf of like, I know this is a tough line to ride, but like, usually when you have a movie like this, the very beginning sort of serves as like a soft recap of maybe what's happened in the story so far, showing us where our characters are at, or how far they've come or whatever. And you don't get that with Demon Slayer, which, you can also argue it's a direct continuation of the show. So if you're going to watch it as a continuation of the show, it's not going to be redundant. But the problem here is that there's such a lack of interplay between the characters that it feels all the more thin, because you have Zenitsu, you have Tanjiro, and you have the other Inosuke.
Yeah.
And those three are once the plot kind of shows up, they're all separated in their own little dream thing. And two, the back and forth that these characters would have in anything that would be worthwhile telling is simply not here. Like, these guys are on this like train and like progressing through it and stuff, and they all just kind of act in a vacuum. There's no like camaraderie between them. Like, one of the best parts of the show, or one of the most memorable parts, is that weird haunted house thing they find Inosuke.
Oh yeah.
And they all get to interact, they get to solve their own problems, but they also get to like have a little back and forth as characters and as friends. And that happens later at the end of the show, where they're all pent up in that little like hospital place.
Yeah.
And here they just don't, like, there's no character moment. There's no moment where Tanjiro talks to Zenitsu about something that's bothering him, or fucking Inosuke having a moment of surprising vulnerability or whatever. They all just act within the confines of their own particular stereotype.
Yeah.
And just go.
That's a really, good way to put it. And yeah, it's just made so much more disappointing by that. I mean, what's kind of cool is that in one of the I think in Inosuke's dream, we see like his perceptions of the other characters.
Yeah.
And we see the same in Zenitsu's dream. And that would be cool if it wasn't just really redundant and stuff we could have figured out by just watching the show.
Sure, this can sort of be argued that, like, again, we don't have to reiterate a lot about the characters. We know stuff about them from the show. And while I will argue against that and say that, like, when your characters are together, like, what I wanted from an arc like this was, in fact, a situation that would allow our heroes to sort of bond together. Because in the show, they're still very separate entities. They only really come together in moments where they're not actively engaging in whatever the current story is. And as a result, it kind of feels like they don't have a whole lot of interplay when they don't have any downtime. But as a result, they just keep acting like the most boring version of themselves. There's nothing to reinforce their characters here. It's like Inosuke is like barely even in this fucking movie. I mean, he's just like, he's there, he does things occasionally, but in terms of his character, it's like, if you watch this as like a standalone movie, which again, you shouldn't, but at the same time, if you watch it as a movie, it's like, there's no real arc here for any of these characters.
Yeah.
There's no journey, there's no change. And I get that it's a movie condensing an arc, but you gotta have at least something for me to latch on to. Like, what's Tanjiro's dilemma here that isn't his dilemma in a macro sense?
The closest thing I can think of to these characters having a unique character arc, and this, I think this will lead us into the next part, is that the main three guys are like fawning over the flame Hashira guy, Rengoku. Yeah. And basically we have like one scene where he kills those two demons where it's like, whoa, this guy's so cool. And they're all just, I mean, that's, I think, the most interaction you get between them, just their agreeance that this guy they've just met is cool.
And you know what, dude? There is something you can totally pull out of that can be compelling. All of these guys are amateur demon slayers, so obviously they're probably going to try to prove their mettle. They're all kind of innately heroic and want to prove their salt in some way or another. And if they all fawn after this Rengoku dude, then the conflict of the movie, to me anyway, naturally would be, all of them maybe trying to overtly impress this dude and maybe slipping up and kind of causing them to have a little bit of an oversight with the battle that they're currently fighting, and trying to sort of balance being like, show off teenagers to impress this cool dude, but also, being in a life or death situation. And naturally, the emotional core you can wring out of that is, you can develop a bit of a bond between these two as like a sort of pseudo mentor figure. And then you can think he's cool and powerful. And then the ending will come in and he fights this really hard battle against this really big dude. And then he fucking, spoiler or whatever, but it's like he dies. And the emotional core you get out of that would be like, this dude that I really liked and respected and who was super powerful just fucking died on a whim. And this is the kind of world that I'm putting myself into. Like, he's stronger than me. What does that say about what my future is going to entail when I'm on this journey? And everything I just said might as well be fan fiction, because none of it's in the movie. Not a single line of that kind of conflict or any other conflict.
Let's talk. We got to talk about Rengoku.
He's a microcosm for everything I feel about this movie, and that a lot of it is like on paper, fine, sure, I guess it could work. But in execution, it's so fucking bizarre because Rengoku as a character is like one of the first things we see him doing is just like saying a phrase over and over again to himself,
over and over again,
as like while staring without blinking, and it's just kind of like, so is this the characterization we're getting here? Because I don't really understand what's meant to be relayed here. Is it like that he's, just kind of weird? Sure, okay. Like,
everyone's weird in Demon Slayer is kind of how you have to respond to that.
Yeah, it's like Inosuke is a dude who walks around with a fucking boar head on his normal face and is like constantly like he's a fucking like feral child, and fucking Zenitsu is just like horny and weird, and Tanjiro is a fucking simp, but whatever. Yeah. But like these people are here, and you have Rengoku, who's supposed to be obviously this kind of charismatic dude that they can like look up to and see, and it's like he's a little awkward, and I don't really understand any of the writing choices that attempt to characterize him. He's just sort of like, I am a large presence who's going to move the plot forward, and
that's exactly the issue. You are told things about him, but you never experience those things. Like, every attribute about him is entirely informed. His character ultimately ends up being that he doesn't have one, and it takes so much of the weight out of anything he does, because we don't get his backstory until about an hour or so into the film.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's a pretty generic backstory, all things considered, even for the Demon Slayer universe. It's like his father didn't want him to go and become the Flame Hashira.
But he did, because he's determined, I guess.
And he's got a younger brother
who looks exactly like him, who we thought was him during the flashback, because they have the exact same character design, which, that's a bit fucking confusing. But like, not to keep circling back to it, but it's like, this is something that just does it better. And like, I understand that this is going to be truncated to some degree because it is a movie, but it's a 2-hour film. And out of that, you get that's like 6 episodes worth of an anime. And typically speaking, 6 episodes is about half of a season. So, that's a lot to condense, but you have to pick and choose the things that you're willing to condense to make the experience remain compelling. And the thing is that they chose all of the wrong things to do it. There's no way to convey just how thin all of this is without basically just showing you the whole movie and being like, this is why this doesn't work. Because even though we're being negative, this doesn't sound like the awful experience that it absolutely was watching. It was just constantly in the process of waiting for something compelling to come along, for an idea or a moment in the plot or a character to have some kind of a turn or something. And it just never happens. And you can do this with this limited time amount. And I know that because the Soul Society arc of Bleach happened. And that entire arc is one of my favorite shonen arcs ever, up there with some of my favorite Hunter x Hunter ones. It's a great little arc because the world building is cool and because of one thing in particular, and that's the people inside that arc. There are literally dozens and dozens of those fucking Soul Reapers there. And the show characterizes all of them. All of them. The captains come along, they'll be in one episode, and you immediately get everything they're about in a 20-minute long span. That's all you have to do. That's all they had to do with Rengoku or one of the other. You have 20 minutes that build up the rapport between our characters. You have the inciting incident, a following 20 minutes where you get introduced to Rengoku, and then you can sort of have the plot progress from there and have them go about this little adventure on this train. And instead, it's like just, oh, I love the compelling story of our three lead characters falling asleep and getting stuck inside an Inception dream that, okay, like there
was one dream.
Yeah, Tanjiro's, isn't it?
Oh, I think we might be thinking of different things. You go.
Oh, well, the one moment that came along to me that it's not executed well, and I'll get to why, but like that at least in theory could be interesting, is that Tanjiro, like this little like dream thing that they get put in is sort of like a wish fulfillment thing to placate them. And Tanjiro gets put into a previous version of like he can see his family again. They're all alive, and he comes back, and Nezuko is there, and like all these things. And it's like, that's a really great emotional idea. What you do is you have Tanjiro have to be like presented with this fantasy that solves all of his problems, and through the power of determination, he will ultimately see through the facade and defeat it, and then go on to do what's important, which is protect his friends and protect Nezuko. Yeah. But the movie doesn't do that. It's so obvious, and it just skates right through it. It's like you had it right there in your face.
It's such a frustrating scene because the idea is blaringly obvious, and
that's what we both thought it was going to go. We were just like, oh, obviously, and it was like, yeah, sure, fine, we knew where it was going, but it was an idea. And then the anticlimax there is just like, oh, he's just awake now. He's because he's determined he's anime like, boy.
Oh, he figured out it was a dream, and okay. it's like, oh, he didn't have to overcome anything emotionally, and ultimately the dream did just devolve into being this nightmare thing. So
all the dramatic tension is just sucked out of that potential moment, and that's all you needed for his character arc in this story. That would be an important thing. That's like Tanjiro is faced with the thing that's basically defined his entire life up until this point, and now he has to see past that. And that's
just him saying I'll never go back is compelling enough, but that ends up being undercut by not being the emotional beat the film obviously wants you to be centered on. The center, as made evident by the ending, is Rengoku's death, which that's its own problem.
It's like learning to accept the inherent tragedy of life. You can absolutely make a great, compelling story out of that. And it also leads into my second biggest problem, and that is, on a more broad sense, the writing. Movie, this is such a baffling film, because Demon Slayer is such
the English dub.
We did watch the English dub.
So
but the English dub of the show is good.
If the Japanese audio and subs are better written,
sure.
I'll give you that.
Yeah, but even then, a lot of my problems extend to things that would have happened in the Japanese version. Basically, with like stuff like Zenitsu and fucking Inosuke's specific dreams and stuff. That like this, like Demon Slayer got popular because its appeal is broad. Basically, I think that's sort of the key to finding the crossover appeal between a successful anime is you have to balance out the aspects of it that play to an Eastern audience and the aspects of it that play to a Western audience. And Demon Slayer is that. It's not like, there's some anime that you watch and the writing of them are so inherent to like Japanese culture, and just like the way jokes are written and comedy and like all of that, which is distinctly not American. And that can be kind of a turnoff. So you
And
have
I
shows
will
like
say,
Demon Slayer that don't
there,
really have those elements.
yeah. And there are also shows, I think, like the Monogatari franchise, which managed to overcome that really inherently Japanese part to their construction.
They
And,
almost teach you about it because if you're savvy, you can be like, oh, this is commenting on tropes that are in this artistic field.
and also just in the writing of the dialogue specifically, a lot of that show's puns are baked into Japanese words that just simply don't translate into English. Like one of the first I remember reading about was where a character kicks another character in the face with their knee while saying Haisa, which is both a traditional Japanese greeting as well as Haisa being the word for knee. And that's not a joke you can translate into English. And that's all throughout the medium.
Yeah, it's inherent to it, and to some degree you're going to have to deal with that. And even if we watched a version that was slightly worse written than the other ones, maybe the localization was different, is that I watched the English dub of Demon Slayer proper, and I never had any of these problems with the show. So there's obviously a disparity here, but man, the actual like dialogue and some of the jokes they go for are just like, it felt like I was watching an anime from 2008. It was so like weird, and I mean, first of all, I mean, the main problem is that a lot of it just isn't really that funny.
That's
But it's like
yeah.
it's so heavily Japanese and strange that it's like it almost makes it's there's no other word for it. It's cringe. It's really fucking cringe. You just kind of like listen to these like lines and stuff, it's particularly Zenitsu, where it's just kind of like, man, could they have just bothered to give you a line of dialogue that was indicative of something that isn't the fact that you're whining and or a perv? Like
That was like I remember there was that sequence at the beginning of the film where the characters were like these little chibi things.
yeah, oh, that was so weird.
That was like the worst joke in the whole film because it was like I didn't even know what was being went for there. It just was, well, I mean, I did. It was just a terrible, awkward execution of that idea. And
Ugh.
and then having the characters have to do their little meta comments on it, like, why are we so small? Was obnoxious.
Oh god, that was so weird. And like they just keep commenting on like situations and stuff, and it's just like it feels. We talked about how in the past how a lot of fan service in anime, or like, you know, sexual appeal of it is like it bothers us when it's non-diegetic. If it's inherent to the universe, the world, the themes, or the characters, and it's something that's, you know, to be brought up. And even when it isn't, sometimes, you know, if you want to be a horny show and you don't really want to like say much about being a horny show, that's also fine. But this isn't even in regards to like sexuality, but it feels like the dialogue itself is non-diegetic. Like when I hear the dialogue in this movie, I don't hear a line from Tanjiro, a line from Rengoku. I hear a line of dialogue that is meant to convey an idea to the audience, not from a character, but completely irrespective of the movie itself.
That's yeah, that's a really great way of just putting how just almost uncanny the film can feel at points.
Yeah, it was a culture shock for my girlfriend who doesn't watch a whole lot of anime, just being like, what in, like, that was what really opened me up to just how awkward it was, is that she was just
Yeah,
constantly in a state of like, was that comedy? Is the show like this? And I was just sitting there the whole time like, I promise you I don't regularly watch shit like this, because it was embarrassing. Because like I don't want to say that I like Demon Slayer and then get associated with some of the jokes that are here,
oh my
because it's
god,
embarrassing.
yeah, oh gosh, there
uh,
was it just was. And then the film just kind of shifts tones from this opening 30 minutes in a really
mm-hmm.
clunky way. Like, and look, and anime, Japanese media in general, tone is pretty fluid. I don't have a
Uh-huh.
problem with it. Uh, I mean, hell, I like a lot of, I mean, hell, Jetman's tone can even be a little fluid on an episode to episode basis. There are some goofy episodes, goofy monster designs, Hunter x Hunter, even
Yeah,
anything like anything fully coolly fuck me, that's a great example. That goes
there
from the
you go.
most heartbreaking depressing shit ever to weird and funny. this doesn't work tonally. It just, the transition feels incongruous with what happens previously is the best way I can describe it. Like the humor and the levity associated with that early part of the film just kind of stops at one point. It feels like the script was written in a way where someone wrote like the basic, like, act one tone comedy, act two tone drama.
Yeah. Oh wow, that's like it definitely feels like it was designed by too many people and thus has no like singularity to it because there's a lack of definition here that almost feels like if you change the character designs, I don't understand what about this is quintessentially making it about the Demon Slayer universe. It just seems like Joe Schmo anime that's got like a little bit nicer animation than usual. And you can make your argument that like that's kind of what Demon Slayer is that it's a tried and true story. And it's true. But the reason this movie fails is that it's just failing at being that tried and true story. And like oh man, there's such a fucking like one of the in another potential interesting idea throughout it is that there's a part that's way too brief where everybody is asleep, but Nezuko inherently, who is a demon, is not. So she has to like free them. And something again that this movie should have capitalized on was it's just like the agency of Nezuko herself as a character because she's kind of sidelined in the show because she's not particularly important. She's a plot device. She's a thing for Tanjiro.
I mean,
She's
and
motivated.
I've read spoilers that she gets more interesting and develops more abilities as the show goes on.
Yeah,
Perfectly fine. I mean, it's just nothing is done with her as with every other character. I
and they
felt.
had the opportunity right there, and it just pisses me off that they instead like and it's not even like they had an opportunity to like, oh Jake, you're just wanting this movie to be a completely different thing, and it's like no 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 no, don't mistake my words here. This isn't me wanting this to be a different thing. This is me wanting this to go in all of the avenues that it says that it's going to go down but doesn't commit to. Like if I was making this, it would, or if it was what I wanted, it would be completely fucking different. I'd change basically everything about it and keep all of the core to it. But man, it's so fucking frustrating because it's just like it's not like I want it to do anything weird. I want it to do things that are functional. I want it to do things that are just going to make it an actively engaging experience. And every step along the way, it just decides to trip over itself.
Like, I'll give you the first method towards functioning. One, and this also goes towards writing. Don't set the whole movie on a train. That one location, it
Or at
hinders
least
it
make
so
it a snow
much.
piercer and make the train's design or interior interesting. Make them all different. It's called Infinity Train for fuck's sake, and every cart looks the same. Fuck
and
off.
and they have to resort to dreams to change up the setting,
Yep.
and
And
even
then they
then
change the
the
setting at the end, and it's the worst setting.
and even those dream settings aren't particularly interesting. It's a cave, a field, a house.
And you've seen two of those things before in the show. It's not exactly like it's showing you a new cool different thing. Just fucking make it a like that's the thing is that you have these dream sequences and it's like I'm not asking for you to be Satoshi Kon or anything, but you have this ability to be like, oh, I can make this dream anything. There's limitless possibilities for this. And they all it's like it's more grounded than the plot proper. And it's just like, well then what's the point of this? I don't understand.
Okay, so that's a lot of the problems with the middle.
And that's the final third really is the worst part of the movie.
This and the middle, horrendously boring, horrendously uninteresting, zero character development. And then the final third happens, and so they beat the big stupid dumb train villain. Fucking
They break his neck bone.
bury him because he's gay.
Yeah. And And then we have the fucking whatever, it's like third or fourth
I'm
demon fucker.
he was, let's see, I'm gonna look this up just because I want to know who the hell this is.
Akaza.
Let's see. Uh, Fucking hell, where is it? Is this yeah, Akaza. That's the dude.
Yep. And like I'll point out to the main reason this is what really sealed the deal on this movie. And it's quite simple. It's just fucking boring. It's one thing. It's something that when you look at the plot summary of this movie is summarized in the span of 2 sentences, and it's the entire final third of the movie, and it just refuses to end. And I can't stress enough how the movie feels like it's going to end after the train thing, and then it feels like a new episode of the show starts.
That's the best way to put it. It feels like I turned on a new episode, or like it started auto playing on Netflix after I was like, oh, I'll watch the Infinity Train arc and then stop for the night. Oh, this episode started playing. Shit.
Oh no, spoilers, except the fucking other villain shows up and you don't know anything about him, and he's the entire final battle. He just shows up to be a strong foil to Rengoku.
He's there and he's like,
he's strong. He's a strong man.
He's stronger. He's stronger than the train man. That much is for sure.
And like the one thing here that isn't just big two guys fight is that like near the end of the fight, the bad guy's like forced to get away from them because the sun is coming up, and the sun fucks demons up if they're exposed to it in this universe. Yeah. And Tanjiro gets fucking angry and just like he calls him a coward, and he just runs away, and then Rengoku just dies, and it's like.
Oh, and that's another thing I wanted to mention. Everyone in this movie is constantly yelling. It is the most annoying thing ever, especially when you already hate yourself throughout it.
Anytime Zenitsu opened his mouth, it was just shrieking, and I'm like, please, God, someone duct tape his mouth shut. I can't stand him.
I would rather listen to Merzbow's entire discography.
It's the worst noise rock album of all time. Is the final third of this film.
My God.
It's like, and again, we already alluded to the fact that the location isn't interesting, and
they're just fighting on the edge of a forest. It's like, who cares? It's like an open field.
I don't need this maximalist thing with everything. You don't have to make everything great, but God, at least make everything aesthetically in keeping with what you're trying to accomplish. And it's just this lazy ass final tacked on 30 minutes that just frankly, I don't know what they add to the film. I don't really know if there's like.
Well, I think it's trying to satisfy this conclusion of like, oh, now we killed Rengoku.
Fucking Visual K starts playing, and they're just like, Brr.
Yeah. So about this death, it's you don't care because Rengoku sucks as a character, and you don't care about him.
He's like weird, but he's also not weird enough to be anything other than boring.
I mean, as we talked about earlier, him dying and then everyone blubbering up in tears. It's like you knew him for a day, not even. I mean, yeah, death sucks. It's sad, but
no, totally. And it's just like, I'm sure he gets more development in the manga. And in the days since I've watched this, something really, really big jumped out at me that I just made me hate it more, even though it's really not the movie's fault. But like, in terms of things like having your main characters being stuck inside of their own little like nightmare fear thing, and then that sort of final battle between like a mentor character and like a main big bad dude, and and eventually he dies, is that these are plot points that I've written in a story that I've published in a real thing, and by association, it's like, wow, I didn't think that was perfect or anything, but at least my version of all this shit happening was interesting, which this is not. And it makes me upset. And it's a silly, stupid, petty complaint, but it goes to show you how you have all these parts and you have all these components, and you can arrange them, even if it's thin, to be something compelling in your story. It doesn't have to be great. It can just be functional. And the movie stops short of functional in every single way that it is not animated.
And I want to talk about perhaps the funniest moment of this whole watching of this film was when we just skipped past the last 10 minutes.
We read online, we were just like, do we miss anything? It's like, no, he reports the death to the demon slayers, and it's over.
Funeral,
it's
they
like,
cry, sad.
It's like, cool, man. Like, if you had a bond with this dude, even if it was for like a day, it's like, give me one little emotional thing between you two. But no, you're all weird characters that all exist on your own fucking plane of reality, as far as I'm concerned. You're all coincidentally kind of together. And after all is said and done, this movie, the worst thing it does, it is completely kneecapped my interest in continuing Demon Slayer.
That is absolutely how I feel too, because they have like 11 other Hashira at their disposal, and it just makes me think, oh, this is going to happen like at least 9 more times, because more than likely they're going to kill off a bunch of the Hashira for whatever mini arc they want to do. Because so far, I think there's only like 2 you care about remotely. Yeah. The water one and the insect lady are all right.
Yeah, they're like, and they've got cool character designs and all. But like, even if you told me it was just like, hey, this arc in the manga is much, much better. And you know what? I'm sure that you're right. Because if the first part of the show's adaptation is anything to go by, that most of the time with the TV show, at least, they do care about the things they're adapting. And it's like, okay, the reason is that it's such a whiplash in quality of this one. And honestly, like, when you're a show like Demon Slayer and you're not something terribly original and you're really just kind of focusing on fleshing out the fundamentals of what you are, there's only so much mileage I can give a show like that, because it's going to end up being like 180 episodes long. And at the end of the day, if I can't risk other arcs being like this, because I will just waste my own time, even if the rest of the show is great. It's like, after this, I simply just don't understand how this show that has this part in it could at any point evolve into being something that I like or think is worthwhile, even if it improves from here on out. I just don't think it's going to do anything interesting. Made at least apparent by the fact that, like, we talk about what we would change in a lot of these different fucking things. That,
yeah.
We talk about how it would work for us. And, that's not always a fair complaint to lob at something.
Absolutely not. But
the thing with Demon Slayer is, if you gave that story to me, the inevitable ending is, again, at least if I got to do whatever the fuck I wanted, the inevitable ending is going to be basically a good guys win ending, but the emotional coda and fulfillment of the arc for the entire show and for Tanjiro would be that he eventually has to kill Nezuko. And frankly, after seeing a lot of this, I simply don't think the show has the balls to do that. I think that it's going to be a journey that feels interesting in the moment, but will leave little impact on me as a result. And it just won't do something like that would profoundly, like, he did this whole journey thing and did all these things and he still couldn't save her and he has to accept what's happened.
That's kind of exactly how I would want to take of it. I think of the ending of the book of Mice and Men, which every kid reads in school.
Yep.
And the death of the one guy, I forget his name, at the end.
Been too many years, but I know what you mean.
That one guy's death is something that's, I think, for every kid who experiences it and really tries to engage with what they read in school is always such a powerful, interesting ending. And it's a fairly archetypical ending, but I think it has this, that book works up the courage to build to that, and this just clearly has nothing, not a bone of courage in its DNA, not a bone of something fresh, something exciting. It's so uninteresting.
It just serves as like, and it's even more egregious here because before, at least, Demon Slayer was a testament to the fact that you didn't really need to be fresh or terribly original to be something that people like and that people latch onto, and to just like to prove that the genre is still successful. And now it just completely went up its own ass at the complete end. And for all I know, maybe that is how the series ends. But after this, I just don't feel inclined to continue it. It's completely nipped. It's like if this was some sort of spin-off movie, if this was some fucking The Last Mission or whatever, I would just be like, okay, well, I mean, at least I can try out whatever comes next. But like, they went to the trouble of like, this is the next part of Demon Slayer. This is Infinity Train. This is a big deal. It's just like, if you treat your big deal like this, I don't know, man. That feels like it feels like you might have adapted the stuff that's very. I mean, the stuff they've adapted so far in the show proper is stuff that is successful because it's shown in anime stuff. It's stuff that every other show has done before, and it works. Now that the show is trying to develop its own identity outside of that, I don't have the confidence in it to be able to sustain that. I think it'll become a mess.
That's kind of how I feel.
It's a tragedy, sure. I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of people who really like this movie be like, oh, well, I mean, whatever comes next will be good. And it's just like, yeah, but that's why the movie is so thoroughly repulsive to me, is that it's just like, if you can manage to kill my interest in something that I enjoy this swiftly, there is a world of possibilities. There are so many books I haven't read, so many anime I haven't watched, and I simply cannot devote the time to something that might be good.
To the maybe, yeah, that right there is this film's core issue. That maybe it leaves you with.
God, this was exhausting as watching the movie. Granted, at least we have something to show for it, and I got to work through some shit. But good God, it's sad that, in all honesty, the next thing we're probably going to cover on this show is, in fact, the next Eva movie,
which is out tonight.
Is it tonight?
That's tonight.
Is this the second time this has happened on this podcast? Where
I think so.
It premiered in Japan, I think, and I think you noted that when we mentioned it on an earlier episode.
Yeah.
Or something. Oh, God, that's fucking strange.
August 13th is when it's coming out, and that's not too many hours away from now.
When did they say it will be on streaming afterwards?
Amazon Prime. It's going straight to Amazon Prime. So.
Well, that will definitely be the next thing we watch. And frankly, I can't imagine it being a more pleasant experience than this.
I'm certainly very excited.
Yeah, oh, totally. Like, this will, if anything, that's the thing that makes that okay, that damns this, is that no matter how bad those Ava movies get or how much we don't have fun with them, there's so much to work with. There's so much density. And like, we could have easily doubled the length of our video on the Ava trilogy if we wanted to. Whereas this is just like, it's just bad because it's not good.
That's going to be a fun video.
Oh, yeah. So look forward to that on the horizon. And look, you're probably here because you're a fan of Demon Slayer, and maybe you're a fan of the movie. And, if you made it this far, congratulations. I don't know if I would have been able to.
No.
But if you like the movie, fucking good for you, man. That's 2 hours of your life that you don't regret. Sadly, August and I, we're cranky assholes. What can I say?
Yeah, that's just us at the end of the day.
At least we don't devote time to watching shit like Black Clover.
Oh
which would just
God.
be an utter waste of so much time on my part, on your part, and like there's nothing we could say that's interesting about an anime like that are out now.
It would just be a waste of like oxygen in general.
I really, really hope that Ultraman movie still comes out so I can
Oh
say a
my
nice thing
God.
about Hideki Anno for once.
Damn.
I want to compliment him. I want to say good things about your work, sir. I'm sorry.
Anyway,
Yeah.
that's the RubberGum Anime podcast. Thank you for watching. We will remain cynical for your sake.
Yep. Rock over London, rock on Chicago. Rengoku did 9/11.